Harborne, Birmingham. A leafy suburb that prides itself on quiet streets, family homes, and a veneer of respectability. But on September 22, 2022, beneath the ordinary calm, a brutal chain of events unfolded that would leave one man bleeding out in his own car. At the center of it all was Richard Hoppley. 43 years old, a driver by trade, but by then already sinking under the weight of addiction. Hoppley wasn't a kingpin. He wasn't even a career criminal. He was, in truth, a man caught at the bottom rung of the drug economy, a disposable cog working for a dealer known only as Ace. To those around him, Hoppley came off as desperate but useful, a man who would take risks others wouldn't, if it meant another hit, another payday. The spark that set the night ablaze? A fake £20 note. Harmless to most, but in the underworld, counterfeit cash isn't just a nuisance. It's an insult. It's a signal of disrespect. And disrespect in this world demands an answer. Enter Orb Khan, the architect of the night's disaster. Khan was no small-time hustler. He had ambition, a crew, and a plan that mixed calculation with recklessness. Around him orbited younger men, eager to prove themselves. Mohammed Kasim, volatile and quick to anger, and others who saw violence as a shortcut to respect. Together, they decided Hoppley would pay. The plan was simple, at least on paper: lure Hoppley in under the guise of a routine deal, then rob him. Strip him of the cash, the drugs, the dignity. But plans drawn in shadows often unravel under pressure. That September evening, Hoppley drove out, unsuspecting of what lay ahead. To him, it was just another job, another run, another chance to get closer to his next fix. He pulled into the meeting spot, a quiet stretch in Harborne. The car's headlights cut through the dusk, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Waiting in the dark were Khan's men. As soon as Hoppley sat down, the trap snapped shut. Shouts. Movement. Chaos. The robbery turned violent in seconds. Kasim, fueled by adrenaline, produced a knife. Hoppley tried to fight back, slamming the gear stick, trying to drive, desperate to escape the ambush. But the confined space of the car became a cage. The blade struck. Once. Twice. Then again. Witnesses later recalled the car lurching forward, almost mounting the curb, then screeching to a halt. Inside, Hoppley was bleeding heavily, his body failing him. The men scattered into the night, leaving him gasping for life in the very vehicle that had carried him to his fate. By the time emergency services arrived, the damage was irreversible. The fake £20 note, a scrap of worthless paper, had spiraled into a murder. The theme was written in blood. In the drug underworld, it doesn't take an empire to spark tragedy. Sometimes all it takes is a counterfeit bill, a fragile ego, and a handful of men convinced that violence is the only currency that counts. Every criminal empire has its architects. Men who sit just far enough back from the front line to believe they are untouchable, yet close enough to pull the strings. In this case, the figure in the shadows was Orb Khan. Khan wasn't reckless in the way street dealers are reckless. He cultivated an image of control, the man who organized, who calculated, who always had a plan ready before anyone else saw the problem. To his crew, he was the brains, the one who decided when to strike, when to step back, and when to let others get their hands dirty. But control in the underworld is always an illusion, a mask that slips the moment real chaos enters the room. By his side, or perhaps better described, out in front of him, was Mohammed Kasim. Where Khan plotted, Kasim acted. Young, unpredictable, knife in hand, he was the blunt instrument of Khan's designs. In Harborne that night, it was Kasim who turned a robbery into a murder. A single flash of steel changed everything. A plan for intimidation became a crime that no one could walk away from clean. Backing them were Nicholas Stallard and Paul Hales, the muscle of the operation. Men who thought of themselves less as killers and more as enforcers, present to intimidate, to reinforce the threat, to make sure no one walked out of a deal without paying. But when Hoppley fought back, when the robbery became a frenzy, intimidation collapsed into complicity. In a matter of seconds, the whole crew were no longer background figures. They were accomplices in a killing. Hoppley, though grievously wounded, tried to flee. The car staggered forward, headlights bouncing across the street, before shuddering to a halt. Neighbors later described the scene: the driver slumped, blood on the steering wheel, the interior smeared with violence. The attackers had melted away into the dark, but their fingerprints, their movements, their messages, all of it lingered in the wreckage. Police didn't need long to realize this was no random street assault. The victim's background with drugs, his link to a figure called Ace, and the immediate suspicion around Khan and Kasim painted the picture of a feud spiraling out of control. Forensic teams scoured the car, detectives traced digital breadcrumbs, and soon the net was tightening. But the men at the center of it weren't going to wait around. Khan and Kasim vanished, boarding flights to Pakistan within days. To them, the move was bold, even clever, putting oceans between themselves and British detectives. They believed that from abroad, they could vanish into new lives, free from the consequences of that September night. Yet the modern world is not built for fugitives. Phones leave trails. Bank accounts hum with activity. Conversations, even encrypted ones, are vulnerable. Surveillance doesn't stop at the border anymore, it stretches, pulls, and waits. What Khan and Kasim thought was distance only became evidence. The illusion of control, that's what defined this crew. Orb Khan imagined himself the chess player, Muhammad Kasim the piece that could strike unseen, and the other supporting the game. But control is fragile. The moment Hoppley's blood stained the inside of that car, the board flipped. Every move they made after that, every panicked decision, brought them closer to the inevitable: capture, extradition, and judgment. In their arrogance, they believed they were smarter than the law. What they hadn't realized is that the law had already begun writing their downfall in silence, line by line, bite by bite, until their shadows had nowhere left to hide. January 31, 2024. A cold Birmingham morning, the kind where streets in Erington seem quieter than usual, curtains still drawn, and the weight of winter hanging in the air. Behind one of those doors lived Wallace Webb, a man who, by all accounts, carried no enemies. 65 years old, a former chef, a counselor, someone who had spent his life listening to others. A kind man, solitary but generous. He had time for people who didn't always deserve it. That morning, he opened his door to one of them. Sakanda Hussein stepped inside. To the outside world, it might have looked like nothing, just another visit, just another conversation. But within minutes, the space that had always been Webb's sanctuary became a crime scene. Hussein drew a knife and unleashed a brutal attack, stabbing the man who had welcomed him in. The very act of trust, the opening of the door, became the mechanism of betrayal. The details are harrowing. Neighbors would later recall the silence that followed, the absence of movement, the sense that something inside Webb's flat was terribly wrong. By the time anyone realized, it was already too late. Wallace Webb lay dead in his own home, his kindness repaid with steel. But what followed twisted the knife even further. Hussein didn't flee in panic. He didn't crumble under the weight of what he had done. Instead, he used Webb's bank cards. Shopping trips. Transactions. Purchases made while his victim's body remained undiscovered. Cold, calculated, almost casual. As if the crime were not an act of passion but a means to an end, access to money, access to things. For detectives, that arrogance became the key. CCTV cameras across Birmingham caught Hussein moving from shop to shop, carrying bags, swiping cards that should never have been his. Every transaction left a digital echo, every step a visible thread. While he believed he was living above suspicion, investigators were already mapping his movements, building a timeline that stitched his face to the murder. The betrayal cut deeper than the knife. Webb wasn't just a victim of violence, he was a victim of misplaced trust. He had let someone into his home, into his personal space, believing perhaps that help or friendship was possible. Instead, that door opened to his killer. It's the kind of crime that resonates beyond the victim. It rattles communities, shaking the fragile belief that home is safe, that kindness is rewarded, that age and generosity are shields. In court, the evidence was chilling in its simplicity. CCTV footage. Bank records. Forensic traces inside the flat. A chain of proof so clear it left little room for argument. Hussein's face appeared again and again on screens, his callousness projected for jurors to see. His guilt was undeniable. The theme of this chapter is simple, but devastating. When trust is weaponized, even the safest places become vulnerable. For Wallace Webb, his home, the space he had built in Erington, the walls that should have kept him secure, became the stage of his final moments. For the community, it was a reminder that sometimes, evil doesn't break the door down. Sometimes, it waits politely on the other side until you open it. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they turned with weight. In Manchester Crown Court, 2023, the story of Richard Hoppley's murder reached its grim conclusion. Orb Khan, the so-called architect, and Muhammad Kasim, the man with the knife, stood in the dock, their calm exteriors doing little to mask the violence written into their histories. The judge's words fell heavy: life imprisonment, with a minimum of 30 years to serve. For Khan, it was the collapse of a criminal empire built on illusion. For Kasim, it was the cost of blood on his hands. Their muscle, Nicholas Stallard and Paul Hales, were not spared either. Though not the men who drove the blade, their role in the ambush was undeniable. Stallard received 13 years, Hales 10, manslaughter convictions that still carried the weight of Hoppley's death. Together, their sentences painted a stark picture. In the world of organized crime, there are no minor players when a life is lost. The following year, justice shifted south, into the halls of Wood Green Crown Court, 2024. Here it was Sakanda Hussein who faced the reckoning. He had brought chaos not to a street corner or a car, but into the sanctity of a man's home. The betrayal of Wallace Webb, a 65-year-old who had opened his door in kindness, stood at the heart of the case. The judge condemned Hussein's cruelty, describing it as callous, remorseless, and fueled by arrogance. His sentence, life imprisonment, with a minimum of 21 years. 2 courts. 2 years. 2 men dead. The threads of greed and violence ran through both cases, one planned on a quiet Birmingham street, the other carried out behind closed doors in Erington. Richard Hoppley, ambushed in a car. Wallace Webb, betrayed in his own home. Both victims of a world where trust and fear are weapons, and ordinary places become stages for extraordinary violence. The judge's words echo beyond the courtroom walls. These were not crimes of desperation, but of design. Not heat-of-the-moment outbursts, but calculated acts of cruelty. The law delivered heavy sentences, but still the question lingers, was it enough? Life with 30 years. Life with 21. For the victims' families, no number, no sentence, will undo what was taken. For the public, the question is sharper. Should justice come down even harder on those who trade in betrayal, who turn homes and streets into hunting grounds? And that brings us back to you. What do you think? Were these sentences true justice? Or should the law strike with even greater force against those who weaponize trust and fear? 2 lives ended in 2 different ways, but their stories are bound by a common thread. Violence doesn't always arrive with warning. It hides in shadows, in handshakes, in open doors. And when it strikes, the ripples spread far beyond the crime scene. If you found this case as gripping and unsettling as we did, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story we uncover. And most importantly, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Justice, or not enough? Your voice keeps this conversation alive.